Time now for Back Pages tonight on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining us tonight from Frankfurt, ESPN's Mark Ogden and Sam Dean of the Telegraph as well. Let's quickly run you through the back pages. We will start in the Mail. Handbrake off is the message from England's vice-captain Declan Rice ahead of their final Euro 2024 group game against Slovenia. We'll also look at that exclusive from Mike Keegan that Birmingham asked to play Wrexham in the United States in a game next season. Into the Sun, Declan Rice featured again. There might be changes in the midfield from Gareth Southgate. The former England midfielder Jack Wilshere said he'd select Manchester United's Kobbie Mainoo alongside Declan Rice. Telegraph says that Gareth Southgate has hit the reset button after last week's underwhelming performance against Denmark. Also an interview with Emma Raducanu, who says she's fallen back in love with tennis as she prepares to play at Wimbledon next week. And in the Times, the players apparently urging Gareth Southgate to let us go for it in that final group match. We'll also talk about that story about a PSR loophole that's under scrutiny from the Premier League. And in The Guardian as well, a great image from that late goal from Italy that has seen them into the last 16 at Euro 2024. And we touched on this before the break that Declan Rice has said the forwards have been frightening in training. Will England be able to replicate that on the pitch tomorrow? So we will get into a pretty comprehensive preview of England against Slovenia tomorrow, with England already into the last 16, but they will be keen to win their group. We will touch on the Mail, which talks about the handbrake being off. And there have been a lot of bold claims, particularly from Declan Rice, Sam, but it needs to be a lot better than that game on Thursday last week, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the good news for England and all England supporters is that the England players and Gareth Southgate have very clearly acknowledged that. I think no one's trying to pretend this has been a great set of performances so far in this tournament. And there seems to be a very kind of open and honest approach, both internally within the squad and also externally within the conversations with the media. And you see, for example, as the Mail have done, England want to go on the attack and set off the leash and handbrake off. And Rice was quite open today, speaking about how England want to press better and be a lot more aggressive without the ball. And I think one of the main things that's been coming out of the first two games is that England feel they haven't done that very well. And you'd have to assume, given the very strong reports that Conor Gallagher is coming into midfield, that is the main reason why. I think most people would agree that Gallagher's the best presser that England have got, the most energetic midfielder. He's up and down the pitch all day long. And you can see that that's clearly the issue that Southgate has identified above all others. And I guess the hope for England is that if they fix that problem, then all the other problems we've seen will be solved too.
It's interesting, Mark, because the line in the Telegraph or the headline, Southgate hits the reset button. Do you think there will be a lot of people who are slightly disappointed that reset doesn't involve more changes in personnel if we expect it to just be Conor Gallagher for Trent Alexander-Arnold?
Yeah, I think people are, hoping for maybe Anthony Gordon to get a run or for Kobbie Mainoo, but I suppose, too many changes would kind of send a message of almost panic out. And I think England have qualified. We know that tonight's result, strangely, the Italy result, has helped England secure qualification. So they're through, but obviously it's about where you finish in the group. You want to win the group. You don't want to finish second and play Germany and Dortmund on Saturday. But I suppose Southgate is thinking we need a bit more energy in the team, because with Alexander-Arnold there's not as much zip around the pitch as Conor Gallagher provides. But I think it's a bigger issue than just switching Gallagher for Alexander-Arnold. I think I saw the game against Denmark last week, and it felt at times England were playing like a 4-2-4 formation, because you had Jude Bellingham and Phil Foden were playing up front more than they were playing in midfield. And I think Bellingham particularly has to help out in midfield more than he has been doing, because when he's playing the final third, there's massive gaps in the middle of the pitch. So Gallagher will make a difference. He will get around a bit, but I think it's not just on the two midfielders, Rice and Gallagher, to make a difference. Bellingham has to drop back. Foden has to drop back a bit more. Harry Kane has to do more pressing. And I think I was just mentioning off air how it's going to be really hot in Cologne tomorrow. It's going to be 27 degrees at kickoff time at 9 o'clock. So, we heard last week about the roof being closed in Frankfurt, how it affected England's performance, how they were tired. It's going to be hotter than that tomorrow. So I think they have to find a way to conserve their energy. But yeah, Gallagher being in the team will help bring some more energy to the team, but obviously everybody else has to play their part.
On that point about energy, Sam, in the Times, it says Rice promises new high-octane England. He says you'll see an England team that will have a different pressing style that they've been working on. Interesting piece from Adam Lallana in the Times as well. It says England, this is talking about the Denmark game, England were a little bit of everything and a little bit of nothing. They're not really pressing high and they're not really setting back. They are stuck in between. Is that what you saw in that Denmark game, that a lack of identity?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And I think the one thing you don't want when you try to press is to press in ones and twos with one or two players going and the rest sitting back, and it creates these huge gaps. And I think we all saw that Denmark had those gaps to play in, and they did it very well. They controlled the game for long spells of that evening. And yeah, it's clear there needs to be more of a collective purpose with the way England defend without the ball. But also, as Mark said, there are other concerns too. And I do worry about the sort of ball retention and Kieran Trippier playing left back and the ball coming inside a lot, and Phil Foden drifting inside too. That England don't seem to be able at the moment to stretch teams. And perhaps, as Rice and Southgate have sort of been intimating in the past few days, perhaps getting the pressing right will set the platform for that to all work. But you do wonder a bit, and with Gallagher coming in, he's obviously, as we say, a great player, very energetic, but he's probably not the player who's the most composed on the ball, and perhaps someone who can take it in tight spaces and work it out in the same way as other players. So it will be very interesting to see in the heat if this pressing focus does lead to all these other changes, or whether it ends up being a fix potentially to one problem but not to some of the other very important ones.
It was interesting, Mark, one of the lines from Declan Rice that the Sun are running on their back page. We will be more in your face, roll your sleeves up, let's have it. We need to focus and bring ourselves to war. There's been a bit of a war of words as well in the build-up to this game, particularly with a lot of reference to Gary Lineker's quotes on his podcast. He's got a point, hasn't he? He's a journalist or presenter, whatever you want to call him, and he's very much entitled to have his say. And there is no getting away from the standard of England's performance. And I don't think Gareth Southgate feels there's any getting away from just how poor they were against Denmark.
No, and I think, Gary Lineker, as we do, we all have a right to have our opinion. But I think equally when Harry Kane, hit backs will be too strong a phrase, but when he responded to Lineker yesterday, he did make the valid point that Gary Lineker, Alan Shearer, all these players have played in major tournaments before for England and not won anything. I suppose this generation has done better than any of the Shearer generation, the Lineker generation. They all had issues with the media at times, issues with criticism. They never liked it and they never dealt with it particularly well. But I suppose every generation of England players has to deal with the fact that the country expects and is desperate for success. It's the biggest major nation not to have won a major trophy for such a long time. And maybe there's a sense of entitlement there. I don't think there is, but I think England have produced so many great players. But every time a tournament comes around, the pressure is on them to deliver. And the older players, the ex-players, the pundits, will have the right to an opinion. And just as these players, when they become pundits in 5 or 6 years, they'll have an opinion as well. So everybody wants England to do well. And let's remember the last two tournaments, England started exactly the same way: a win, an unconvincing draw, then they got a victory and got through in the final game. So I just think there's a pattern at play here with England. They never really start particularly well. They get a bit of confidence, get a bit of momentum, and then they run into the knockout stages. So, Germany drew Switzerland last night. We've seen Italy struggle a little bit. So maybe a little bit of calm is needed, but everyone has an opinion because it matters so much. So Kane's right, Lineker's right, but hopefully when they start winning games, we'll all shut up and just talk about how good they are.
Hopefully not completely shut up, otherwise we won't have a show, Mark. But maybe just be more positive. I think that's the point. Okay. The other point I'd make, Sam, is interesting to hear Lineker sort of continue on his podcast today with responding. But he said journalists are afraid to put their own opinion in a press conference, so they use what I say to ask a question. Give us the journalist standpoint. Do you ask a question with Lineker's quotes because he carries weight as a former England player of great repute?
Yeah, I think, I must admit I've totally been fine with what Lineker has said this tournament, and it's his job, as Mark says, to give his opinion. The one thing I did take a bit of an issue with, as you might have guessed, given my own position and my bias on this matter, is that comment about journalists and him saying that they're not brave enough to put their own view in the question. I think the point I'd make to that, and I'm sure every journalist would agree, is that people don't care about our view particularly, not compared to the view of former players and people who have been there in the shirt. When Gary Lineker says something about Harry Kane, it matters a lot more than when Sam Dean, the Telegraph, says something about Harry Kane. So of course there's more news value to a former player saying it. And that's why people like Sky Sports and every other every other broadcaster, they look to employ ex-players as pundits and experts, of course, because people want to hear their views. They know what it's like. They've been there. They've been on the pitch. They've felt those emotions. As journalists, we haven't. We're just a conduit between the players and the managers and the readers and the people out there. We're not the guys who know what it feels like, unfortunately. So, of course, there's more value to when Lineker says something to when we say it. And I don't think it's hiding behind Lineker when we put that question to players. It's reflecting Lineker's status, if anything.
Just in terms of former players, Mark, Jack Wilshere on the back of the Sun saying he'd bring Kobbie Mainoo into the team alongside Declan Rice. We think it will probably be Conor Gallagher. Is there any concern, and it's obviously far too late to change it now, but when Gareth Southgate made a lot of bold calls with his squad, whether it be Mainoo or Wharton or Eze or Palmer, that he doesn't know about a lot of these players on an international stage? Of course, they're all good players, but the likes of Grealish or Rashford, who haven't made the squad, at least he knew what he could expect from them.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. And he did mention Calvin Phillips and Jordan Henderson in his press conference after the Denmark game in the sense that they haven't replaced those, but he couldn't really justify picking either. He couldn't justify picking Calvin Phillips considering the last 12 months he's had at City and West Ham. And, Jordan Henderson, again, in Saudi Arabia with Ajax, so they didn't deserve the place in the squad. But obviously their voice, their experience is not there, but you have to replace them with somebody. And, Adam Wharton and Kobbie Mainoo are good players. Jack Grealish and Marcus Rashford, I don't think Marcus Rashford could have any complaints. He's had a poor season at Man United, but I think Jack Grealish probably just about deserves to get in. I think James Maddison is another player as well that probably deserved a shout. But that's Southgate's pick, it feels like a squad where he's throwing everything at it. He wants to go with exciting youth, but he's not really playing them. Anthony Gordon is another one that's not had a kick yet, and I think we've got some great talent in this squad, great young, exciting talent, and the talent that sometimes isn't weighed down with the pressure that the older players have. The younger players just want to play. They're not worried about the criticism because they're just excited about being at the tournament. So I think there's a real need to inject a bit of youth and a bit of that naivety into the game because it just brings a bit more freshness and more energy as well. And energy is a big thing in this England team. They do look tired, and I don't want to bang the drum saying the Premier League is too hard, but there's no winter break. There's 2 domestic cup competitions. I think it's beginning to show now that they're getting to a tournament in June and July, and they're feeling the heat. Just
on the point about the forwards, Sam and Declan Rice saying that they've been frightening in training, so hopefully we will see that going into the games. But this is the one sort of area where obviously it's Gareth Southgate's job, but you feel a little bit of sympathy in that unless he wins the tournament, everyone can always turn around with those forward players and said, well, you should have picked him or you should have picked him. He can't really win unless England go on and lift the trophy.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, people have already cited quite regularly how England have got the best player in La Liga in Bellingham, the best player in England in Phil Foden, and the best player in Germany in Harry Kane. So that's always going to work against Southgate unless he wins. And I think he knows that. And I think everything he said before the tournament kind of suggested that too. And certainly England aren't hiding away from the fact that this is a very talented group of players and the most talented he's got. And yes, that can be sort of a stick to hit Southgate with at the end of the campaign, perhaps. But hopefully from England's sake, that won't be the case. Just on the forwards, I do worry a bit about Harry Kane's fitness because we've seen, obviously, he missed the last few games with Bayern Munich. He's been substituted off in the Euro 2024 so far. And it's just very unlike Southgate to remove Kane, and especially when things aren't going particularly well. And we know he had a back issue, and back issues can be quite complicated. And also, we know from Harry Kane's career over a long time that he is always quite a slow starter. I don't know if you remember how he used to struggle to score in August for year after year after year. And because he missed a few games at the end of the season, he actually had quite a big break. And I wonder if he's still sort of finding his feet, and that might be why he came off for Ollie Watkins against Denmark, for example. And you have to hope, I'm sure everyone in England's hoping that Kane can get fully fit if he's not fully fit. But I think that would be a slight concern, especially when you think about the heat and the intensity that England want to play with this tomorrow night.
Just to stay with you, Sam, having seen them in the flesh, what can we expect from Slovenia, would you say?
Yeah, quite old school. I've seen both of their games so far, and they play like a traditional 4-4-2, really. But rather than having a little and large strikers up front, they've got 2 large ones. One of whom is Benjamin Sesko, who I'm sure people are becoming aware of, and if not, will be aware of very soon. He's an RB Leipzig, sort of the latest of the Red Bull product line, and Arsenal are willing to pay more than £50 million for him this summer. But obviously he's chosen to stay in Germany for now. And yeah, he's 6'5", he's quick, he's got 2 feet, and he can shoot really powerfully. So keep an eye out for him, and yeah, keep an eye out for the long balls. And just very quickly, a quick fact and stat for you. Only one team has played more long balls in the 2 matches so far, the Euro 2024, than Slovenia. And that team is England. So you've got the 2 long ball teams playing each other tomorrow night.
Fantastic. It's going to be like Stoke against Bolton from 2012. Welcome back to Back Pages. Tonight, ESPN's Mark Ogden and Sam Dean of the Telegraph are with us this evening. Let's just have a quick look at the back of The Guardian, which focuses on that late goal for Italy to send them through to the round of 16. Spain through as well as group winners. Mark Ogden, the late drama keeps on coming at this tournament, doesn't it?
Yeah, unbelievable. I mean, last night the Scotland game was ridiculous, but tonight as well, Italy at one point looked like they were finishing third and possibly playing Portugal next Monday I think in Frankfurt, and then all of a sudden they're playing Switzerland in Berlin at the weekend. So I mean, these third place kind of safety nets certainly keep the groups alive, and I think Croatia were heading for second, Italy heading for third, but you can't knock the competition. I think I can see why some people think it's diminished the quality by having 24 teams and allowing so many third-place teams in. Like I say, it keeps it alive and it lends to some real excitement as well. So I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I think we can take it too seriously sometimes and say it has to be the purest form of top quality, but it's giving teams a chance, fans a chance, and Scotland went into that game last night with real hope of going through in third place. Didn't quite manage it, but they had that opportunity in the final game. So there's nothing worse than tournaments where you get to the final groups games and there's nothing left to play for. So I think it's a good thing. The quality might have diminished a bit, but we get the quality in the knockout stage anyway. When you get to the quarterfinals, they're the games that you remember. So for me, it works. The World Cup in a couple of years' time with 48 teams might be a little bit different, but I think the format with the Euros works because it gives everybody a chance to stay alive.
Italy's goals are featured on the back of the eye, the reigning champions still alive. It feels, though, possibly, Sam, like the end of the line for a great Croatia team that have bloodied so many noses at so many recent tournaments.
Yeah, it feels that way, doesn't it? Luka Modric, now 38, getting the record for the oldest player to score in a European Championship. But when I was looking at the population of Croatia earlier, it's about 4 million. It's less than Scotland's. And you compare the players they've produced to play like a country like Scotland, and that's not to dig out Scotland in particular, but obviously they've had a bad tournament, and once again Croatia have been really pushing and very much been more than some of their parts. And I think this generation of Croatian players have absolutely exceeded all expectations, almost every single tournament, the way they have kind of grind out results. And I think there's an amazing statistic that they've got to sort of 3 consecutive semi-finals without actually winning a game in 90 minutes in knockout stages. Like the mentality they show and the sort of defensive awareness and the sort of that grit and willingness to win that so many countries are unable to replicate at these big moments. So, yeah, if this is the end of this generation, and certainly I presume it will be the end for Luka Modric on the international stage, then what a journey they've had and what a player Modric has been at these tournaments.
Let's just move away from the Euros for a moment and look at this in the Times from Martin Ziegler, their chief sports reporter. Mark, the Premier League is monitoring player transfers that could be used to exploit a loophole in its spending rules to ensure they don't breach regulations about clubs acting in good faith. The likes of Everton, Villa, Chelsea, all very close to the line. It does feel as though creative accounting or finding a way round the system has become very much the modern trend and fashion.
Yeah, I mean, and that is understandable if the rules and regulations, whether it's football clubs or businesses, will always try to, push them to the boundaries. But I do think these rules are no longer fit for purpose because every transfer now seems to be about the club's bottom line or they're complying with these rules. We always talk about Chelsea offloading a lot of young players that have come through the ranks just simply because they are pure profit. Now, surely when you produce a homegrown player, it's for the good of your club and the fact that you can, develop players that have a feeling for the club have got a connection to it, not simply to be sold because they make pure profit. And I think this latest kind of loophole about clubs trading between themselves just to help comply with PSR just makes a mockery of the rules. So I can see why they're in place. Clubs can't just throw money around and spend money as though it's there's no tomorrow, but they do have to find a way to make the rules more realistic. I think as well, the cap on losses, like £105 million over 3 years, was set so many years ago now. It doesn't really apply to the modern game in terms of the valuation of players. So the rules need looking at because if they keep being exploited with loopholes, they become pointless.
And the quick point to make, Sam, and we've seen it with other things earlier in the season. We touched on Chelsea there, but selling hotels effectively back to themselves. It seems as though if you've got intelligent people within your club, which someone like Chelsea are always going to have, you're always going to look to try and find ways that you can be just the right side of that line.
Yeah, and I think in this particular case, there are intelligent people within one club who have spoken to people at another club in a similar situation and gone, well, lads, we're both at risk here with PSR rules. Let's work together and find a way out of it, which really can't be the way that these rules were set up, or shouldn't be the way that these rules are set up. And I think that the big issue currently now is the issue of sort of fair market value. And I think the rule in question with the loophole is Rule B15 in the Premier League's rule book, which says that clubs cannot act in a way that is intended to circumvent the rules. And obviously, inflating transfer values, for example, we're not saying anyone's done that in this particular case, but if a club was to inflate transfer values to help with PSR and then to do the same, buying a player in the other direction, that would, in my view anyway, be constituting a circumventing of the rules. So you certainly can see issues coming here, and the question with fair market value is how do you determine what that is? I mean, the value of something is generally what somebody's willing to pay for it. And if Chelsea are willing to pay £20 million for Amari Kellyman from Aston Villa, and that's what they think he's worth, and I think it's quite difficult to show otherwise. And there'll be all sorts of benchmarking issues and how much did previous players go for who are at similar positions in their career and those sorts of things. And it gets very confusing and very difficult and very hard to manage. So fundamentally, it all comes back to Mark's point, which is that these rules as they stand are promoting the wrong sort of things and incentivizing the wrong sort of moves by clubs. And I think it's pretty clear that something needs to change.
Just finally, very briefly, Mark, because we've only got about 30 seconds left, but do you fancy Birmingham against Wrexham in LA next season?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I know that when Wrexham were in the National League, they basically persuaded the league to allow streaming to be allowed for non-league fixtures, and it helps, boost the income for all the clubs in the National League. It's a novel idea. We've seen it with the 39 step with the Premier League, but I'm not sure the game's ready for it yet. But whether LA or New York or Chicago wants Birmingham v Wrexham, that's an interesting one. I'm not sure it's just ready for it yet.
We shall see. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for being with us, to Mark and to Sam as well. The podcast will be available and on at 1:30 every hour. To